Israel has fallen. The city of Jerusalem has been besieged and the people have been taken into exile. In exile, as we heard last week in Psalm 137, the people are taunted by their captors and asked to sing one of those songs that you sang on your mountain in Zion. Sing one of those songs. Entertain us with that song. The song's about the temple, the place where you believed that your God especially lived. And as you sing those songs, if you were to sing them, you would probably think about how the temple had been ransacked. And eventually the final exile of the psalm, of course, is the temple and the whole city is destroyed. People suffer terribly in the sieges. People suffer terribly when the city falls. Some are killed. Some have died of starvation. Others from illness. And you have been taken away from your home, away from your city, and you are in exile. And so Psalm 137 finishes with a cry from the depths of the hearts of people who are filled with bitterness over their experience. Remember, O Lord, against the Edomites, the day of Jerusalem's fall, how they said, tear it down, down to its foundations. O daughter Babylon, you devastator. Happy shall they be who pay you back what you have done to us. Happy shall they be who take your little ones and dash them against the rock. As I said, maybe in church, maybe in the outline for the sermon that goes into the notice sheet, if my wife, Heather, had been killed before me or had died as a result of the siege, if my children had died and been taken away from me, if my house had been taken away from me, if the place where I worship had been destroyed, and I had been taken into exile, then I would want to cry out to God for vengeance, for the same sort of thing that had happened to me to happen to my captors. This is a human reaction. It may not be the right reaction, but it's a human reaction, and it is a good thing that justice is in the hands of independent judges and juries and not in the hands of the wronged. For down that way lies the way of revenge and the endless cycle of violence and war and bloodshed. It is even better, a better thing, that ultimately justice is in the hands of God and not in the hands of the aggrieved and the wronged. What does God ask the people in exile to do? We hear it in the letter that Jeremiah writes to them in chapter 29. Verse 5 says, build houses and live in them, plant gardens and eat what they produce. Verse 6, take wives and have sons and daughters. Take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, that they may bear sons and daughters, multiply there and do not decrease. But seek, verse 7, the welfare of the city, where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf. For in its welfare you will find your welfare. Instead of vengeance, there's not simply an acceptance of the lot of the exiles. There's even God asking them to show goodwill towards those who have done such terrible things to them. Instead of plotting overthrow or escape or hoping for deliverance, there is an encouragement to get on with life. So firstly, get on with life. Marry and have children. There can be no greater vote of confidence in the future than marrying and deliberately having a family. There are people today who could have children who choose not to because they believe that there may not be a long-term future for the world. Perhaps I'm being a bit harsh, but I believe that attitude, there may be other good reasons not to have children, but that attitude that there's no future for the world is wrong. I'm not a climate change skeptic, and I do worry about the rising tensions in the world, particularly between the United States and China. I worry about the shift in the sense of community, where most social groups, from Rotary clubs to sporting clubs, from political parties to unions and parents and citizens or parents and friends groups are struggling for members. I'm concerned about all of that, but I'm also confident that the future and the present are in God's hands. Jesus has risen and his new life is shared with us by the Holy Spirit. The kingdom of God is already growing up among us, and at the end of time the whole creation will be made new. So despite all there is to be concerned about in the world, I got married, I had children, and now we have bought a house. There is a future. The immediate future may not be the glorious future the exiles in Babylon imagined for themselves in the great city of Jerusalem worshipping in the temple. They were to suffer 70 years of exile, but even in Babylon there was to be a great future they built a life for themselves there. And this brings us to the second thing God asks. Seek the welfare of the city, pray for it, for in its welfare is your welfare. No revenge. No paying back, no dashing of little ones against the rocks. Instead, work for the good of the people who captured and tormented you. Pray for them. Do you hear the echo of the teaching of Jesus from the Sermon on the Mount? You've heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbour and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun to rise on the evil and on the good. He sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. That's Matthew 5:43-45. Why does God ask this of the exiles? Well, partly because it's better to get on with life than stew in revenge. Partly because we've already explored, because ultimately the future is in God's hands. It's also partly because it is simply the right thing to do. Jesus has commanded it. Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. And I think that if there is to be any worldly hope, we must forgive our enemies. It is also for the reason given in today's passage. In its welfare, the welfare of the city in which you find yourself, in the welfare of the God-forsaken pagan city of Babylon, is the welfare of the exiles. We see this in the story of Daniel. He was one of the first group of exiles, probably before the temple and the city are totally destroyed and laid waste. And being drawn into that world of Babylon, he finds himself as a slave, but makes himself useful to his Babylonian captors. And by doing that, he builds up not only the empire, but he rises to a place of importance in the empire and in the favour even of the emperor. Now this pattern must have been continued because Nehemiah, who was appointed later by the Persians as the governor of Jerusalem, of Judea, is clearly himself Jewish. He's part of the faith. He's somebody who is sent as a Jewish person to be the governor of his own people. As a little church in the Wildwood here at Corona Downs Uniting Church, if you're listening to the podcast, which is in Queensland, Australia, near Brisbane, we are facing a situation which is a worry. Compared to the exiles, it's really nothing. We have not lost our homes. We have not lost our church building. We're the equivalent, I suppose, not really, but kind of the temple. We haven't been taken into exile. We aren't facing destruction or persecution. Our nation hasn't been besieged and has fallen. But nonetheless, like the exiles, we do live in a world, as I said earlier, where not only the PNCs and the political parties and unions and Rotary clubs are struggling for members, so are churches in the West. In lots of the rest of the world, and overall, probably the church is growing even as a proportion of the population. But in the West, in even the United States, but certainly in Europe and Australia and New Zealand, churches are struggling, are declining. Yes, some charismatic and Pentecostal churches are growing, but overall, active worshipping Christians are a declining group. As in Babylon, parts of our culture are favourable to us, some are hostile, and most are indifferent. We could simply give up, as the exiles must have been tempted to do, or we could hope for a short-term miracle, as some of them did. Or we could do as Jeremiah suggests and just get on with being the church and living out our Christian faith. If we are obedient, though, we need to do more. We shouldn't forget about our own welfare, about raising funds, increasing giving, and more importantly, getting more people through the door, let's say 5 or even 10 new families in the next 12 months. We need to do that, and we need to get on with living out our Christian faith, and we need to seek the welfare of the city. Seek the welfare of our workplace, of our neighbourhood, of our non-Christian friends and family. We do this, like the exiles, as we've already explored, to get on with life, because the future is in God's hands, because it's the right thing to do. It's the kind of thing that Jesus commands in the Sermon on the Mount, to love our neighbours. But we also do it because in their welfare, in the welfare of our nation, of our community, is our welfare. A byproduct of getting on with life and faith and seeking the welfare of our neighbours is that they may come to support us, to join us, and more importantly, to join with us in joining with Jesus. I want to demonstrate this graphically. This doesn't work well probably on a podcast, but if you are part of a church community, imagine yourself as just the church in a particular location. And all the different things that the church might do to strengthen its faith life, strengthen the numbers who are part of the congregation, strengthen the financial situation of the church. And if you think of yourself as that, and your mission is kind of radiating from the church to those neighbours just around, then that could be an effective and powerful ministry, a strengthening of the ministry of the church, and it will affect and even change lives. But second, think about what it would be like if instead of seeking the welfare of the church, we sought the welfare of the city, the welfare of our neighbourhood, the welfare of our workplaces, the welfare of the community. If you looked at a map and just put a spot where the church is, well, then you'd get one picture. But if you look at that map and put a spot where the church is, and a spot where each of you live, and a spot where each of you work, and a spot where you may perhaps be part of some community or leisure pastime like the golf club or a garden club or a community welfare organisation or a union or whatever it is, and you then look at the map and think about what the impact would be for the community if you sought the welfare of all those places where you are, then think about how much greater your income would be, think about how much greater your impact would be. And then think about the church and the community and yourself, and ask, which promises the best future? Seeking just the welfare of the church, or seeking also the welfare of the city?